Thank you for inviting me. I was invited by Dr. Walsh, chairman of the Universal Peace Federation from New York. I am 80 years old, and I traveled all the way from Manila to join you today. And Dr. Walsh says I should write my own speech, which I did. So, Excellencies, friends, and colleagues, let me first say a word of thanks to the leaders of the Global Citizen Forum, Mr. Modi, Universal Peace Federation, and Dr. Walsh from New York, and the Singapore Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry for the opportunity to speak on the One Belt, One Road alternative perspectives. But so far, I've heard only one who spoke on the One Belt, One Road. For they have undertaken the task of organizing this great initiative to seek synergy among political, economic, and civil society leaders in the pursuit of peace and development. In our great Asian continent, we have an increasing sense of community among Buddhists, among Christians, among Hindus and Muslims, and among Muslims, Sunnis and Shiites, and Jews, and our other brothers of other faiths, and a small minority who are simply non-believers. In Europe and in the Americas and communities, and in the Australian continent, there are overriding Christian communities and political groups of Democrats, liberals, conservatives, atheists, and communists. And in Africa, the people there are largely divided among Muslims and Christians. Today, we are honored to be asked to speak before this great forum, for we subscribe to the founding principle of President Xi Jinping's historic revival and expansion of the Silk Road, which links Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and today Africa, much as its history and legend had linked them during the classical period. From their beginnings in the glory days of the Han Dynasty in the East and the Roman Empire in the West, the linkages between our countries and continents, and even those of parts of Africa, had ranged beyond the exchange of material goods. Even long-distance travel in the Silk Road had its beneficial effects. Notably, the Venetian Marco Polo account of his Silk Road travels inspired the Genoese Christian Columbus voyages to the Americas, New World. Marco Polo started out overland, crossing the Central Asian desert to the court of Kublai Khan. He stayed a dozen years and returned to Venice by sea on the maritime route of the Silk Road. Polo's voyage took him down the South China Sea coast to Sumatra, southeast to India and today's Sri Lanka. From there, he crossed the Indian Ocean to the Black Sea, reaching Constantinople and finally to Venice after 2 years at sea. Excellencies, friends, the value of rebuilding the Silk Road in both its overland and maritime linkages is obvious, and it will redound to all those nations whose representatives are gathered here. Consider how already the Central Asian states are awakening to the possibilities of modernization as Silk Road arteries begin to link them westward all the way to London and eastward by railway to Beijing, encompassing Budapest, Hamburg, Moscow, and Warsaw. Yes, freight to 28 European cities, and also moving them by land and by sea and by air. Similarly, modern infrastructure is bringing together Kunming in Yunnan with Phnom Penh and Singapore in the beginnings of a Southeast Asian growth triangle. And the long-distance trains are moving great cargoes between Asia and Europe, back and forth. In 2005, the Philippines, China, and Vietnam went so far as to venture on a three-way joint survey, which we helped initiate, of disputed areas in this Spratlys chain to assess the area's potential for hydrocarbons exploration and development. Scientists of the three nations pronounced the prospects promising, and it's obvious as members of the ASEAN family that today with China, we must find ways and means to jointly develop the area's hydrocarbons potential to help lessen our common dependence on distant petroleum sources in the Middle East. And we must now seriously consider the feasibility of joint exploration and joint development in the South China Sea instead of conflict and war. And look at the potential for peace, for economic development in the heartland of the South China Sea. Once rid of conflict, a landscape and the seascape of small seaports, airports, oil pipelines, small tourism townships and fishing villages that can rapidly rise in the contested areas once converted into a zone of friendship, commerce, navigation, and development, and become the passageway untrammeled for all global shipping, carrying more than 50% of the sea freight of the world. Further down the road, Excellencies, people-to-people bonds in the Belt and Road Initiative must be the first and principal keys to achieving the good relations among nations in the region, trade, facilitation, joint ventures, networking, and policy coordination as we endeavor to connect highways, railways, electricity grids, rivers, and lakes in the great arteries of the world. For the people-to-people interaction in the Silk Route, officials, multimedia, citizens, builders, developers, tourists, merchants, tradesmen, women and professional groups, those in sports, parents and children, workers, farmers, teachers and students, soldiers and civil servants, all have a role to play and will be moved by the spirit of adventure and participation in the Silk Route of legend and its Belt and Road reincarnation today. For the revival of the Silk Road is a vision that reflects the shift of the center of gravity from west to east, a global rebalancing whose time has come. It should help bind peoples and countries to a common future and rekindle the grandeur and glory of the old and new Asian civilization and serve as harbinger of real and expanding growth in the 21st century. Excellencies, friends, and ladies and gentlemen, this is the classical Silk Road from Xi'an in western China, across Mongolia, into Kazakhstan, into Belarus, into Eastern Europe, into the Mediterranean, into Venice. This was the classical route of the first century. Now Xi Jinping speaks of the maritime Silk Route from Fujian or from Guangdong, across the South China Sea, into the Straits of Malacca, Singapore, and onwards into the Gulf of Thailand, into the Indian Ocean, into the Arabian Sea, into the Red Sea, into the Straits of, into the Suez Canal, and into the Mediterranean, again going towards Italy and Venice. This is the maritime Silk Route. But now President Xi Jinping has added another route, moving forward across the Red Sea into Africa. So now this Silk Route that we speak about is Asia, Europe, and into Africa. Excellencies, friends, permit me now As I pointed out when I spoke in Beijing 2 months ago, the Great Silk Route, where 30 presidents and prime ministers spoke with President Xi Jinping, I said there is a third route. Let me explain what the third route is. For from the provinces of Fujian or Guangdong in southern China, the third route could perhaps cross the South China Sea into the Philippines, into Malaysia, into Indonesia, into Singapore, and the small island nation of Timor-Leste onwards, already in northwestern Philippines as part of an extended belt and maritime road plan on the banks of the South China Sea. An agri-tourism belt and large petrochemical and industrial complex, much needed in the region, is now being planned for implementation into my province of Pangasinan by pioneering Chinese and Philippine groups. And from Timor-Leste to Australia's Gold Coast to Sydney and New Zealand, the extended route could move across the South Pacific and enter Latin America, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, and tourism-rich Caribbean islands, then Mexico all the way to the US, as in the old days of the galleon trade from Manila to Acapulco, Mexico, which sailed for 250 years. Yes, Excellencies, friends, the proposed 21st century third route, hopefully an enlargement of the Silk Route, would make China's celebrated Belt and Road Initiative almost globally inclusive and create a linkage with two more continents, Australia and Latin America, in a new circumnavigation, in a revival of the age of exploration, and a new spirit in the age of globalization. It is to be expected, friends, that the Belt and Road Initiative should encourage strategic thinkers to look into the opportunities for peace, joint ventures, exploration, trade, and development in the various areas of Central Asia, South Asia, the Middle East, West Asia, Europe, and Africa, including those their highways, railways, airports, seaports, and natural gas, minerals, industrial parks, and special economic zones, and the reconnection of the land corridors and the old sea routes. India and Japan, while not currently actively participating in the Belt and Road and maritime projects, should perhaps eventually integrate their proposed Asia-Africa growth corridor into partnership with China's Belt and Road Initiative, now already joined by 60 nations in a grand concert, in a grand partnership that the US, Europe, and the rest of the world should be applauding in the pursuit of global and regional peace and development. The potential for conflict management and peace in the Senkaku Straits or Diaoyu, the tiny but potentially explosive isles in the North Pacific, a conflict area between China and Japan, the crisis over Kashmir between India and Pakistan, the continuing problem in the Himalayan range between Chinese and Indian troops, the dangerous tensions in the Korean Peninsula among the US, South Korea, and North Korea, the latter supported but also restrained by China, the conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh between Armenia and Azerbaijan, the ever dangerous Arab-Israeli conflict, and the prospects of a two-state solution are much awaited, sometimes with fading hope, by the international community. And in between, we see the violent clashes in Iraq and Syria, and the emergence of ISIS, ISIL, and the violent proponents of an extremist Islamic caliphate, now battered in Iraq and Syria, but today moving small terrorist groups into Europe, into the United States and Southeast Asia, and even into the Muslim areas of my country in Mindanao. Friends, there is urgent and continuing need of synergies for peacemaking and building of friendship. Most difficult but not impossible among the US, China, Russia, Japan, India, Pakistan, the two Koreas, Israel and Palestine, and some of the areas of Eastern Europe, and certainly and surely to actively involve the United Nations system. Here in Singapore, perhaps we can suggest an appreciable role by supporting the modifications and other possibilities of the Belt and Road Network and its maritime extensions in the various regions as contributions to peace, development, and as alternatives to conflict and war. The Americans, the Indians, and the Japanese should not see the Belt and Road Initiative as an exclusive Chinese enterprise, but something to be collectively owned and shared by Asia, by Europe, by Africa, and all the other countries of the world. Perhaps this could be the part of the message of our great gathering today in Singapore. Thank you and good day.